They forced me to use the service entrance. They tipped me $100. They have no idea the maid scrubbing their dishes is actually a billionaire. Watch what happens when I finally take off the apron." The security guard looked at me like I had just crawled out from under a rock. His eyes swept judgmentally from my faded vintage jeans to my old college sweatshirt, and I could practically see him calculating my net worth at about $12 and some pocket lint. He stepped forward, blocking my path to the main entrance of the Plaza Royal Hotel with all the authority of someone who had been doing this job for exactly 3 days. "Delivery entrance is around the back, sweetie," he sneered. "Uber Eats, right?" I stood there on the bustling New York sidewalk, holding a half-empty coffee cup. I told him quite politely that I was here for the Vance Sterling engagement party. The smirk that crossed his face could have curdled milk. He actually laughed, pointing his thick finger toward the side of the building where a small, rusted sign read, "Service Entrance." "Apparently the help needs a reminder on how to use the appropriate door," he muttered. "My name is Harper Vance. I am 32 years old, and at that moment, standing in my deliberately casual clothes, I probably did look like I had gotten lost on my way to deliver takeout. The irony was not lost on me, considering what I actually did for a living, but I kept my mouth shut. Sometimes the best revenge is served in courses, like a 5-star meal. My sister, Chloe Vance, had called me 2 weeks ago with the enthusiasm of someone inviting you to their own execution. She had made it crystal clear that I should try to look presentable for once, because her future in-laws, the Sterlings, were very particular people. She had actually used air quotes over the phone. She also mentioned, oh so casually, that maybe I should not mention my little online business thing because the Sterlings were old money and would not understand internet jobs. My little online business thing happens to be Vantage Holdings, the parent company that owns 17 luxury properties across the United States, including the very hotel I was currently being barred from entering. The security guard was still staring at me, his radio crackling with self-importance. I could have shown him my identification. I could have made one phone call to my general manager, Marcus. That would have changed everything. But where was the fun in that? Instead, I smiled sweetly and headed toward the service entrance. My beat-up sneakers squeaked against the pavement. Just as I reached the side door, a familiar voice shrieked across the parking lot. "Harper!" Chloe herself, resplendent in a dress that looked like it cost more than most people's monthly rent, came clicking across the asphalt in heels that definitely were not made for walking. Her face was a masterpiece of confusion and barely concealed horror. She looked right at me, then through me, then at the security guard who was now explaining that he had redirected the delivery person to the proper entrance. Chloe actually giggled. It was that same nervous laugh she had used since high school when she was embarrassed by association. She waved her manicured hand dismissively and said something about how these people always get confused about where they belong. These people, her own sister. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper and walked through that service entrance with my head held high. The kitchen was chaos, pure, beautiful chaos that smelled like garlic, truffle oil, and expensive beef. Wellington, the sous chef, immediately mistook me for the replacement server they had been expecting. He shoved a white apron into my hands before I could protest. "You are late," Wellington barked. "Station 4. Now!" The head chef, a mountain of a man named Jean-Pierre, who seemed to communicate entirely in French curse words and disappointed sighs, took one look at me and declared, "You are on shrimp duty." Within minutes, I was elbow-deep in crustaceans, peeling and deveining like my life depended on it. The other kitchen staff barely noticed the new addition to their ranks. They were too busy gossiping about the disaster unfolding upstairs. Apparently, Chloe had already sent 3 champagne deliveries back for not being champagne-colored enough, whatever that meant. The servers were taking bets on how many times she would change her mind about the napkin arrangement. The current count was 6, and the party had not even officially started. I learned more about my sister in that kitchen than I had in the past 5 years of sporadic family dinners. She had been terrorizing the staff for weeks with her demands, insisting that flowers be flown in from Holland because local roses looked too pedestrian. One server mentioned she had actually made the pastry chef cry over the engagement cake design. But the real tea, as the younger servers called it, was about the sterlings. "Old money," a dishwasher whispered. "So old it has practically turned to dust." Mrs. Victoria Sterling had arrived earlier to inspect the venue and spent 40 minutes explaining how their family had been hosting parties since before the hotel was even built. She had name-dropped so many dead relatives I thought we might need to set up a memorial table. Suddenly, the kitchen door burst open like someone had kicked it. There stood Chloe in all her bridezilla glory. Her face was the particular shade of red that meant someone, somewhere, had done something unforgivable, like breathing incorrectly. She stormed through the kitchen, her heels clicking like angry typewriter keys, demanding to know why the champagne was not properly chilled to exactly 37.5 degrees. Chef Jean-Pierre tried to explain that the champagne was at the perfect serving temperature, but Chloe was not interested in facts. She wanted what she wanted, and what she wanted was perfection that would impress the Sterlings. She swept past the prep station where I was wrist-deep in shrimp. She was close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same expensive scent she had borrowed from my apartment 3 years ago and never returned. She did not even glance my way. To her, I was just another invisible pair of hands, making her perfect day possible. After she hurricaned her way back out, one of the servers muttered that the Sterlings were already upstairs telling anyone who would listen that their son, Preston Sterling, could have done better. The kid washing dishes laughed and said he had overheard Mrs. Victoria Sterling in the bathroom on the phone, discussing how to convince her son to call off the engagement before it was too late. I kept peeling shrimp, but my mind was racing. The Sterlings were trying to sabotage my sister's engagement. Chloe was being a terror to the staff. This was turning into quite the soap opera, and I had not even made it to the main event yet. I looked up at the security monitor mounted in the corner of the kitchen. On the screen, I saw Victoria Sterling holding court in the ballroom, looking regal and untouchable. I untied my apron strings, but I did not take it off. Not yet. I had seen enough to know that if I wanted to save my sister, or perhaps teach her a lesson, I needed to see what was happening from the inside. I was no longer Harper Vance, the CEO. Tonight, I was just the help, and the help sees everything. I finished my shrimp duty, wiped my hands on a towel, and told Chef Jean-Pierre I needed a bathroom break. I slipped out of the kitchen with my apron still tied around my waist. The service elevator was empty, which was perfect because I needed a moment to breathe. I pressed the button for the penthouse floor. Not the party floor, but the one above it. The executive level. My level. 3 years ago, I bought this hotel chain through my holding company, Vantage Holdings. I deliberately kept my personal name off most of the public paperwork. It was cleaner that way, and it meant I could walk through my properties without being treated like the owner. You learn a lot about your business when people do not know you are the boss. The elevator opened to my private office suite. I used my thumbprint to unlock the heavy oak door. The space was everything the party downstairs was not. Quiet, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. My assistant had left the weekly reports on my desk, but I was not interested in profit margins right now. I was interested in the bank of security monitors on the wall that showed every public area of the hotel. I flipped through the camera feeds until I found the ballroom. There they were, the Sterlings in all their glory. Mrs. Victoria Sterling looked like she had been vacuum sealed into her designer dress. Her face had that peculiar tightness that suggested her plastic surgeon had been a bit too enthusiastic with the Botox. She was holding court near the bar, surrounded by a group of wealthy women who all looked like they had been ordered from the same country club catalog. I zoomed in on one of the security cameras just in time to catch something interesting. Victoria Sterling was having an intense conversation with someone from the catering staff. It was not Chef Jean-Pierre or anyone I recognized from the regular kitchen crew. She was pressing something into the man's hand that looked suspiciously like a roll of cash. The man nodded and scurried away toward the audiovisual booth. Curious, I pulled up the footage from 5 minutes earlier. The audio was muffled, but the body language was clear. Victoria was giving instructions, pointing at the sound system, and the man was nodding along like an eager puppy. This was not about champagne temperature or napkin arrangements. This was sabotage. I made a quick call to my head of security, asking him to keep a close eye on the situation but not to intervene just yet. Then I left the sanctuary of my office and changed back into my server role. If Victoria Sterling wanted to play games in my hotel, in my house, she was about to learn that the house always wins. Back in the ballroom, the transformation was jarring. Stepping from the service corridors into the party space was like stepping through a portal to a different dimension. If the Land of Oz had been decorated by someone with too much money and zero taste, this was it. Crystal chandeliers competed with neon LED uplighting, and there were enough imported flowers to stock a botanical garden. I grabbed a tray of champagne glasses and started to circulate, becoming invisible in that peculiar way service staff become at fancy parties. Rich people have this amazing ability to take drinks from your tray while looking right through you, as if the champagne just materialized out of thin air. I drifted closer to where the Sterlings were standing. Victoria was loudly explaining to anyone within earshot about their family estate in the Hamptons. She was complaining about how they had to let go of some of their staff because good help is just impossible to find these days. The irony of her saying this while taking a glass from my tray without even glancing at me was almost impressive. Then I heard something that made me stop in my tracks. Victoria was telling Chloe about how they would need to discuss the financial arrangements for the wedding. Specifically, how Chloe's family would be contributing to Preston's investment portfolio. She made it sound casual, but I had negotiated enough billion-dollar deals to recognize a shakedown when I heard one. My sister, desperate to please, was nodding eagerly. She promised that her family had resources and that her sister, me, was a very successful investor who would definitely want to contribute to the union. I nearly dropped my tray. Chloe was using me, the sister she had banished to the service entrance, as her imaginary financial backing. Before I could process this betrayal, Trip Sterling, the groom's brother, sidled up to me near the service station. Trip was the type of guy who thought his trust fund made him irresistible. He had slicked back hair and a smile that had probably worked on 19-year-old Instagram models. He leaned in close, reeking of expensive cologne and entitlement, and asked if I was working this party all night or if I got breaks. I told him I would be working until the job was done. He actually winked at me. It was like a scene from a bad romantic comedy where the rich boy flirts with the servant girl. He slipped what he probably thought was a subtle $100 bill onto my tray and told me to find him later if I wanted to make some real money. The bile rose in my throat, but I smiled tight and moved away, adding his proposition to my mental list of things that would make this evening even more interesting. As I circulated, I heard more pieces of the puzzle. The Sterlings were name-dropping connections they claimed to have and properties they supposedly owned, but something felt off. They were trying too hard. During a quiet moment, I slipped into the business center off the main ballroom and pulled out my phone. A few quick searches through my proprietary databases and some calls to my network revealed exactly what I had suspected. The Sterlings were broke, not just a little cash poor, but drowning in debt. They were selling the family silver broke. Their Hamptons estate had 3 mortgages on it. Their investment portfolio had been liquidated 2 years ago, and they had liens against them from multiple creditors. Suddenly, everything made sense. They were not trying to stop the wedding because Chloe was not good enough for them. They were desperate for it to happen because they thought Chloe's family had money. The financial arrangements Victoria mentioned were not contributions. They were hoping for a bailout. The cosmic joke of it all almost made me laugh out loud. Here were the Sterlings, looking down their surgically enhanced noses at everyone, while secretly hoping my sister's imaginary wealthy family would save them from bankruptcy. And here was Chloe, pretending to be something she was not, to impress people who were pretending even harder. I looked back at the ballroom through the glass doors. Victoria Sterling was getting bolder, whispering to her circle of friends about how the Vance family would be investing in Preston's ventures. Chloe stood nearby, smiling and nodding, completely unaware that she was being set up as the golden goose in a con game. The evening was about to get very interesting. I had the information. Now I just needed to decide how to use it. The ballroom was suffocating. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the desperate energy of people trying to prove they mattered. I needed to escape the noise, so I slipped away from the party and ducked into the ladies' lounge on the main floor. It was meant to be a sanctuary, a quiet place of marble and mirrors, but as soon as the heavy door clicked shut behind me, I heard it, sobbing. Not the polite, dab-your-eyes kind of crying you expect at weddings. This was the raw, gasping sound of someone hyperventilating. I walked softly around the corner of the vanity area. There, sitting on a velvet ottoman in the far corner, was my sister. Chloe looked like a shattered porcelain doll. Her mascara, which she had applied with such military precision earlier, was running in dark streaks down her cheeks. But what caught my eye was not her face, it was her dress. The hem of her gown, that incredibly expensive custom-imported masterpiece, had caught on something. A jagged tear, about 4 inches long, gaped open near her ankle. In that moment, she was not the bridezilla who had been terrorizing the kitchen staff. She was just my little sister, looking small and terrified in a dress that weighed more than she did. I should have walked away. I should have let her sit there in the mess she had created. But old habits die hard. I reached into the pocket of my apron. As a hotel owner who liked to inspect my properties personally, I always carried a small emergency kit, a stain remover pen, a lighter, and a miniature sewing kit. I approached her slowly. I kept my head down and my face partially obscured by the shadows, playing the role of the anonymous staff member she believed me to be. "Ma'am?" I whispered, keeping my voice low and altered. "Let me help you with that." Chloe flinched, looking up with wide, panic-stricken eyes. For a second I thought she recognized me, but through her tears and her own self-absorption, she just saw a uniform. She saw the help. "It is ruined," she choked out. "Everything is ruined. If Victoria sees this, if she sees I am imperfect." "She will not see it," I said firmly. I knelt on the cold marble floor at her feet. I pulled out the needle and thread, matched the white silk as best I could, and began to stitch. My hands moved quickly. I had done this 1,000 times for her when we were kids, fixing her dolls, patching her jeans, cleaning up her scrapes. Chloe watched me, her breathing starting to slow down. "You are kind," she murmured, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Funny. The only person being kind to me today is someone I do not even know." I concentrated on the stitching, afraid that if I spoke, my voice would betray me. "They think I am one of them," Chloe whispered suddenly, the confession spilling out of her like water from a broken dam. "The Sterlings. They think my family has millions. They think I am this heiress." She let out a bitter, watery laugh. "I lied to them," she admitted. "I told them my sister was this big-shot investor who would fund everything. But I am just a girl from the suburbs who is terrified that the credit card bill for this dress is going to bounce." My hand paused for a fraction of a second. Hearing her say it out loud hit me harder than I expected. She was not just greedy, she was drowning. She was suffering from a severe case of imposter syndrome, believing that she had to buy love because she was not enough on her own. "Why do you do it?" I asked softly, keeping my eyes on the hem. "Why pretend?" "Because I want to belong," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "Preston, he is the only good thing in my life. But his mother, Victoria, she makes me feel like I have to audition for my own life. If I stop performing, I am afraid they will throw me out." I finished the last stitch and bit the thread. The tear was invisible now. I stood up, still keeping my face turned slightly away. This was my chance. I could warn her. I could tell her right now that the Sterlings were the ones pretending, not her. "Ma'am," I said, choosing my words carefully, "sometimes the people judging us are just trying to hide their own flaws. Be careful what you sign today. Not everything that glitters is gold." Chloe blinked, confusion clouding her face. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for a heartbeat, I saw a flicker of recognition. "You sound like—" she started. But before she could finish, the restroom door banged open. Victoria Sterling marched in. "Chloe!" she barked, her voice echoing off the tiles. "What on earth are you doing in here? The photographer is waiting for the family portrait. And fix your face. You look like a raccoon." Chloe immediately stiffened. The vulnerable girl vanished, replaced instantly by the obedient puppet. She jumped up, smoothing her dress. "I am coming, Victoria," Chloe said, her voice rising an octave to sound cheerful. "Just fixing a wardrobe malfunction." Victoria did not even acknowledge my presence. To her, I was furniture. She grabbed Chloe's arm with a grip that looked painful and practically dragged her toward the door. "Hurry up," Victoria hissed. "And remember, smile. We have investors to impress." The door swung shut, leaving me alone in the silence. I stood there for a long moment, clutching my little sewing kit. My anger had shifted. It was no longer directed at my sister. Chloe was a fool, yes, but she was my fool. She was being manipulated, gaslit, and used as a financial life raft by a family of sharks. They were preying on her insecurity. I looked at myself in the mirror. The faded sweatshirt, the messy hair, the apron. I was done hiding. I pulled out my phone. It was time to stop being the big sister who fixes hemlines in the dark. It was time to be Harper Vance, the CEO who crushes hostile takeovers for breakfast. I texted Marcus, my general manager, create the invoice, full amount, and get the security footage ready. I pushed open the bathroom door and walked back into the fray. The party was about to end, but the real show was just beginning. I walked back into the ballroom just as the band began to play a slow, generic jazz number. The atmosphere was electric, but not in a good way. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy, pressurized, and waiting for a spark. I scanned the room and spotted the catering staff member Victoria Sterling had bribed earlier. He was standing near the audio-visual booth, looking nervous. He had plugged a USB drive into the main sound system console. I knew exactly what was on that drive. Victoria had edited a recording of Chloe to make it sound like my sister was trash-talking the Sterlings. It was a classic mean girl tactic designed to humiliate Chloe publicly so Preston would be forced to call off the engagement. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my head of security. "Override the audio feed, play File Bravo, now." Across the room, Chloe was standing at the microphone. She tapped it nervously. "Hello, everyone," Chloe said, her voice shaking slightly. "I just wanted to thank you all for coming to celebrate with us. Joining the Sterling family means so much to me." Victoria Sterling stood near the front, sipping her drink with a predatory smile. She nodded to the man in the audio-visual booth. That was the signal. Suddenly, the jazz music cut out. A screech of feedback tore through the speakers, making the guests cover their ears. Victoria's smile widened. She expected to hear Chloe's voice. Instead, a different voice boomed through the ballroom. "The girl is an idiot, but her family has money. We just need her to sign the prenuptial agreement to secure the loan. Once the bank clears the check, Preston can divorce her in a year." The room went dead silent. Victoria dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The voice on the speakers was unmistakable. It was Victoria Sterling herself. Every head in the room turned toward her. Chloe stood frozen at the microphone, looking as if she had been slapped. "Turn it off!" Victoria shrieked, her composure cracking. "Someone turn it off! It is a fake, a deep fake!" But the show was not over. At that exact moment, the double doors of the ballroom swung open. Marcus, my general manager, walked in. He was not alone. He was flanked by 2 uniformed security officers. He held a thick folder in his hand. He marched straight through the crowd, ignoring the whispers. He stopped directly in front of the head table where Mr. and Mrs. Sterling were standing. "Mrs. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone, "we have a problem with the final payment for this event." Victoria's face went from pale to purple. "How dare you? We will discuss this later." "We will discuss it now," Marcus said calmly. "The check has been returned for insufficient funds. In fact, the bank informs us that the account has been closed for 3 months. Gasps ripple through the crowd. This was the social equivalent of a nuclear bomb. "Lies!" Victoria screamed. She pointed a trembling finger at Chloe. "This is a setup. That girl, she and her trashy family are trying to ruin us." She turned her venom on me, spotting me standing nearby with my tray. "And you," she yelled at me, "you incompetent servant, get me security, remove these people immediately." That was my cue. I set my tray of champagne down on a nearby table with a deliberate clink. "I do not think security will be removing me, Mrs. Sterling," I said. My voice was calm, authoritative. The CEO voice that I used to command boardrooms. I reached behind my back and untied the apron. I pulled it off, folded it neatly, and handed it to a passing waiter. "Excuse me?" Victoria scoffed. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," I said, stepping forward. You are a woman with 3 mortgages on her Hamptons estate, 15 maxed-out credit cards, and a net worth of negative $4 million. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. "Who do you think you are talking to?" Trip Sterling, the brother, stepped forward aggressively. "I am talking to a trespasser," I replied, locking eyes with him. I turned to the room, addressing the confused guests. "There seems to be some confusion. My name is Harper Vance, and I own this hotel." I paused for effect. "In fact, I own the entire Grand Meridian chain, consisting of 17 luxury properties across the United States. And Vantage Holdings, the company that holds the debt on your family estate? I own that too." Chloe gasped. She covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide. "Harper?" Victoria looked like she was trying to solve a complex math problem and failing. "You? But you are wearing a sweatshirt." "I am," I said, smoothing my vintage college hoodie. "I find it comfortable, unlike the lies you have been wearing all evening." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. "Since you like audio-visual presentations so much, Mrs. Sterling, let us look at the big screen." The massive LED screens behind the stage, which had been showing romantic photos of the couple, flickered. New footage appeared. It was black and white security footage from earlier that evening. It showed Victoria Sterling rummaging through Chloe's purse while Chloe was in the restroom. It showed her snapping photos of Chloe's credit cards and identification. "Identity theft," I said casually. "A felony in the state of New York. And here is footage of you bribing my staff member to sabotage the sound system." The video shifted to show the handoff of the cash. "And finally," I said, projecting a document onto the screen, "here is the public record of your bankruptcy filing from last week." The room erupted. Guests were pulling out their phones, recording everything. The facade of the old money Sterling family crumbled in real time. "Mister?" Sterling sank into his chair, putting his head in his hands. Trip Sterling, the arrogant crypto bro, tried to slink away toward the exit. "Oh, Trip!" I called out. He froze. I walked over to him and pulled something out of my pocket. It was the crumpled $100 bill he had tipped me earlier. "You forgot this," I said, tucking the bill into his pocket. "You are going to need it for the taxi ride home. I do not think the limo service accepts IOUs." I turned back to Victoria, who was now trembling, stripped of all her power. "The party is over, Mrs. Sterling," I said. "You have 5 minutes to leave my property before I have the police escort you out for theft of services and attempted fraud." Victoria looked at her husband, then at her sons. Preston, the groom, was staring at his mother with a look of absolute betrayal. "Preston," Victoria pleaded, "darling, do something." Preston looked at Chloe, then at me. For the first time all night, he stood up straight. "No," Preston said. "I think you have done enough, Mother." Victoria let out a sob of indignation, grabbed her purse, and ran for the exit. Her husband followed her, looking like a beaten dog. The ballroom emptied out quickly after that. It turns out nothing kills a party faster than finding out the hosts are bankrupt and the bride's sister is the landlord. The music had stopped. The waiters were quietly clearing away untouched plates of filet mignon. In the center of the vast, empty room, surrounded by expensive centerpieces and broken dreams, sat Chloe and Preston. My parents, who had been silent observers through the entire ordeal, were staring at me as if I had just announced I was an alien from Mars. But I was not looking at them. I was looking at my sister. Chloe finally stood up. She walked over to me, her movements slow and heavy. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her makeup was a disaster, and she looked absolutely exhausted. She stopped a few feet away. I braced myself for another tirade. I expected her to scream at me for humiliating her, for ruining her perfect day. Instead, she did the last thing I expected. She threw her arms around me and sobbed into my shoulder, completely ruining my vintage college sweatshirt with her mascara. "I am so sorry," she wept, her voice muffled against the cotton. "I am so sorry, Harper. I did not recognize you. I did not want to recognize you." I stood there for a moment, surprised, before wrapping my arms around her. "I was so obsessed with being someone I am not," she whispered, pulling back to look at me. "I thought if I could just look perfect, if I could marry into this perfect family, then I would finally be enough. But I was just a pawn in their game." I wiped a streak of black tear stain from her cheek. "You want to know the really sad part?" I said softly. "If you had just asked me for help, honestly asked, I would have given you anything. No questions asked. That is what family does. We do not need a contract or a merger. We just show up." Preston approached us then. He looked terrified, like a man waiting for the executioner. He had lost his parents, his fortune, and his dignity in the span of 20 minutes. "Miss Vance," Preston said, his voice cracking, I had no idea about my parents' schemes. I knew we were struggling, but I thought they were handling it with dignity, not by trying to con your family." He looked at Chloe, then down at his shoes. "I understand if you want to call off the engagement, Chloe," he said quietly. "I have nothing to offer you now. No trust fund, no estate, just debt." Chloe looked at him. She looked at the empty ballroom. Then she looked at me. "Your parents are terrible people," Chloe said to him, her voice surprisingly steady. "Like spectacularly terrible. But you stood up to them. And for the first time in your life, you were honest." She took his hand. "So, if you still want to marry me, knowing that I am not a rich heiress and that I have been a nightmare to my amazing sister, then yes." It was not the most romantic proposal acceptance in history, but it was real, and real was worth more than all the diamonds in the room. "However," I interrupted, crossing my arms, "we need to discuss the bill for tonight. It is $47,000. Preston turned pale. I will work. I will pay it back. Every cent." "Good," I said, "because I have a job opening." I turned to Chloe. "And you?" I said. "You have some apologies to make, starting with the kitchen staff you terrorized." I offered Chloe a job the next day, not out of pity, but because anyone who could organize an event with that many moving pieces, even if it was a disaster, had organizational skills. But she needed to learn humility. "You are going to work in every department," I told her. "Housekeeping, the front desk, the kitchen. You are going to learn this business from the ground up." Chloe nodded eagerly, wiping her eyes. "I will do it. I want to learn. I want to know who I really am." 6 months later, the morning sun hit the pavement outside the Plaza Royal. I sat in my car watching the staff entrance. At exactly 6 a.m., a familiar figure walked up the street. Chloe was wearing a simple gray uniform. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was laughing with one of the housekeepers, holding a coffee tray for her team. She looked tired, yes, but she also looked lighter, happier. Inside the hotel, Preston was working in the accounting department. It turned out he actually had a degree in finance that his parents had never let him use, because working with numbers was beneath a sterling. He was good at it, and for the first time he was paying his own rent. They lived in a small apartment in Queens. They took the subway, and they were more in love than they had ever been in the back of a Bentley. As for Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, they lost the estate. Mrs. Sterling tried to sue me for defamation, but it is hard to claim defamation when everything said about you is true and recorded on video. They moved to Florida, where rumor has it they are trying to charm their way into a retirement community. A week ago, Chloe and Preston finally got married. There were no ice sculptures, no imported flowers from Holland, no 4-string quartet. Just a simple ceremony in the hotel's rooftop garden with family and the friends who actually mattered. When it was time for the bride to enter, I asked Chloe which door she wanted to use, the main elevator, the grand staircase. She smiled at me, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "No," she said, "I think I will take the service entrance." She said it was where her real journey began, and honestly, I think she was right. Sometimes you have to walk through the back door to find out where you truly belong.